Just what's at stake this November? Can Donald Trump actually save America if he wins the election? And what is the line between morality and politics in 2024? We'll be asking those questions and so much more. Blaze News Tonight starts right now. Welcome to a special election edition of Blaze News Tonight. I'm Jill Savage. Today is Tuesday, September 10th. Blaze TV host Jason Whitlock recently spoke on Glenn Beck's show, and he's telling us why he's voting for the first time in November. So he joins us now, along with Matthew Peterson, editor-in-chief of Blaze News. So Jason, thanks for joining us. So let's break this down, because this is a very important question. What convinced you to go and vote this year compared to previous years where you didn't? You sat out.
Yeah, listen, I feel like that it would be selfish on my part not to participate in this very important election cycle. For me personally, I'm a supporter of the people that protested on January 6, 2021. And so many of them have been thrown under a jail, and Donald Trump is the only way many of these people will get out in a timely fashion, or as soon as they possibly can. And that's if President Trump would pardon them. And so I feel like there's real consequence to this election in terms of an issue that I'm very passionate about, and that's relief for the January 6th defendants. And then on an even broader, bigger scale, we seem so on course for World War III if the establishment continues its control over our political system. And so Donald Trump seems like the best way to try to avert nuclear conflict in a world war that could really change the dynamics globally. So there's too much at risk, too much at stake for me to sit this election out. I haven't, this to me is, I've bought the hype that this is the most important election of my lifetime. And so I'm going to participate.
Jason, what would you say to people who, are kind of sitting there thinking similar things to probably all of us have thought in the past, which is, why bother? Politics doesn't work in America. These are all wealthy people who don't care about me. And nothing ever changes and just gets worse, right? All that kind of stuff. What would your pitch be to people now as to why they should get up and vote? I mean, is it, you just said World War III. I mean, is that it? I mean, how would you kind of describe this to most people?
Well, I think it's that, and I think that the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, to me, if you were on the fence, like, oh, the deep state, the people in power, they don't really hate Trump, or he's no different than anybody else. It's clear as day that with that assassination attempt and the way, in my view, that Secret Service, FBI, law enforcement failed in its job, that Donald Trump is such an extreme threat to the deep state that, they tried to take him out. And so you can be in denial that, oh, they try to kill all the presidents, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that's actually true in terms of people that really have a chance at killing a president. I don't think they do it to all of them. And so I just think you're lying to yourself if you don't think there is something different about Donald Trump and his presidency and the political movement that he has set off. And that's not me caping up for everything Donald Trump does. It's not me caping up for his, unconventional, sometimes, off-putting behavior. But just don't lie to yourself. And this election has real consequence, and you don't want to be sitting on the sidelines and saying you didn't do your part if we do wind up in a World War III, if this Ukraine situation continues to get out of hand, if you're tired of endless foreign wars and foreign conflicts, and this has been going on now for 100 years, and we had one president in that time, or I think in the last 50, 60 years, who didn't get us involved in some sort of, foreign conflict. He's our best chance to avoid more endless wars, and that's a compelling argument for me. As is, just on a personal level, if you care anything about the people rotting in jail over January 6th, and I'm not saying that nothing should have happened to those people, but there are people that got years and years. Some of them weren't even there on January 6th, and they're rotting in prison. And we saw people, burn up cities, loot cities, kill police officers. All that stuff was written off and looked the other way. And we've decided that the January 6th people are the worst people on the planet. Let's put them underneath the jail. I'm just sorry. That's a compelling reason enough for me. If Donald Trump did nothing else but pardon the January 6th people, I would be more than happy that I cast my vote.
Jason, you mentioned the Trump assassination attempt. We aren't even officially 2 months out from when they shot Donald Trump, when Thomas Crooks shot Donald Trump. And yet we still want to talk about the JFK assassination. People are still fascinated about that. That's still talked about to this day. It hasn't even been 2 months, and people want to memory hole it like it didn't happen. And yet it is one of the more important things in this election cycle that people aren't talking about. And why is that?
It's funny, Jill, you mentioned JFK, and I immediately went to RFK Jr., who I met here in Nashville. He was on my show a year and a half ago or so, and it was a conversation on camera. There was a conversation off camera, and obviously his father and uncle were both assassinated. And when I look at RFK, and I said this at the time when I met him a year and a half ago, he was so outspoken about COVID and what was going on with Big Pharma. And I was like, man, you're really risking your life here. This is so impressive, because if anybody understands the consequences of speaking truth in this country, it's you, based on what happened to your dad and your uncle. And that's the other thing that's compelling me to get involved. I'm looking at men like RFK Jr. take risk, real risk. He's risking his life, no different than Donald Trump. I'm looking at Elon Musk, one of the richest people on the planet. Get involved in this fight, and there's real consequences. Elon has made himself even more infamous and even more of a business target and just a safety target. And so for someone like me who leans into male masculinity and male leadership, I can't be a coward, be a hypocrite, and sit out. I'm not taking near the risk that RFK Jr. is taking, that President Trump is taking, that Elon Musk is taking. But I have to take some risk. And it's been important to my brand as a journalist to somewhat be uninvolved in the political process and not be a political partisan. But to protect the brand, I have to get involved. The stakes are just incredibly high. And, as you mentioned with the JFK thing, we've had so many events going on for so long, 6 decades now, that haven't been properly explained to the American people. And I'm just tired of it. And I hope a lot of people in America are tired of it. We need some transparency from our government, and we need some government that's actually on the side of the people and not on the side of the political elite and the globalists.
Jason, you might remind me, have you seen the RFK video Nicole Shanahan put out where she goes back and shows something of the assassination attempts on his uncle and father?
I have not. I think I saw it, and for some reason I didn't click on it.
Yeah, definitely worth watching if you're in the audience out there to go check out. And it triggered something in me that you're talking about And she doesn't do it in the video. She doesn't connect it to the Trump assassination. That remains for someone to do. In fact, I don't have enough free time in my life, but I used to EP those sorts of videos, and it's just sitting there. And I guess the theme that I was thinking about, so what you're reminding me of is, you could see these assassination attempts before, and without saying anything about why they're happening, you would show this one, and the difference is that he gets up and rises in a fashion that's so remarkable. If you put it in a movie, people would say that's ridiculous. It couldn't have happened that way. And he gets up. And in a way, it seems to that's the theme of the campaign, and that's sort of what you're saying, that he rises up and he's going to stand against this large, faceless sort of administrative state. But how many people do you think understand that? I mean, I don't, this is what's, people feel it in some way, but how do you get that across? And maybe another way to get it across is to say, well, what would happen if Kamala Harris wins? What do you think about this?
I do. What has gone on, Matt, it's connected to what you're talking about, is it's clear as day, Matt, we don't have a president right now. Joe Biden is incapacitated and nothing has stopped. And everyone's ignoring that we don't have a president. And they want us comfortable with that. So Kamala Harris would not be the president. She would be the puppet they've installed. That's becoming clear as day. Joe Biden is incapacitated. We don't have a president. Kamala Harris, they're putting up for president. And she's unqualified, afraid of the media, won't do press conferences, is basically letting the media campaign for her, and she's facing no resistance. So this is the way she would operate in office. So it would be this shadowy, faceless group of people that are pulling her puppet strings and telling her what to say and setting her in front of a prompter. And they want the American people to be comfortable with that it doesn't matter if Kamala Harris has no business being the president and no qualifications really for being a president. She didn't have any qualifications for being vice president. They're like, hey, that worked. Hey, she was vice president, attorney general in San Francisco, part of the U.S. Senate. They want us used to that. And Donald Trump, because of his wealth growing up, because of his personality quirks, he's not controllable. And they want someone who they can control so that they can continue to orchestrate and run things in a way with no respect for the average American citizen. Trump's weakness, the fact that he's uncontrollable, and it is a weakness because I wish he were more disciplined, but it's actually a strength in this scenario. His unwillingness to be controlled makes him hard for the regime, the establishment, to control and to put puppet strings on. And occasionally Donald Trump wants to put his hands on the wheel of the car and say, hey, no, this is what America should do. And what they want is someone like Kamala Harris who just wants the job, the power, go down in history. That's what this whole thing was about for Joe Biden. I did it because of Charlottesville, and I did it because of, X, Y, and Z. No, you did it because you wanted to go down in history. You wanted to say you were president. A lot of people are power hungry and want that attention. I sincerely believe that, Donald Trump may have some of those feelings. Wanted to go down in history, wanted to be famous, but he also just wanted to do it because he thought he could make a bit of a difference. And so if people don't understand that now, that we have a office right now, the presidency, that's very weak and is getting weaker and weaker by the day. Weak with Joe Biden sitting in there, obviously cognitively impaired, and Kamala Harris, qualified, impaired. If I don't know, the facts are so obvious to me that it's difficult. I get Trump derangement syndrome. I get, I've talked to people in my own family that, well, I just don't like Donald Trump and he's not nice. And, he's just not. And I'm like, this isn't high school student council where you vote for most popular person in school or the prettiest girl or whatever. It's only thing I care about, the only thing we should care about at this point is the policies. And are the policies going to lead us into a world war, a nuclear conflict? Or are the policies going to help it so your groceries are cheaper? And for me, are the policies going to lead as the president going to spring some people up out of prison that I'd like to see out of jail? If people don't understand that at this point, I just give up, and I wish we could go. I've said it, and I don't want to irritate anybody, but I just say, they should only let married people with kids vote. No one else needs to vote. If you're married and have kids, you vote. You got a higher stake in this country than those of us like me that aren't married and don't have kids. You have a future to worry about. And so when you don't have a future to worry about, when you don't have kids and you're not married, you just become very selfish. And hey, what's best for me? And, are all my needs getting met? And, it's not my vote. Anyway, that's
that's all good.
I'm so stupid.
That's all good. It's only the leader of the free world, Jason, but what's up for grabs? No big deal. Well, you know what? Go get your I voted sticker this year. We're proud of you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Our next guest will tell you why there is more at stake than just the election. Up next. If you like what we do around here and you want a great way to tell people that you're watching and listening, well, you're going to love all the Blaze Media merch available at shopblazemedia.com. We have everything from the Blaze Heritage Foundation stuff to Blaze Media collections. People are wearing these around the office all the time, the jackets, the hoodies. We even have like the mugs and candles. There's so much that you're going to love. So go to shopblazemedia.com today and check out all the cool stuff available from Blaze Media, and be sure to use the code BLAZE10 to get 10% off your entire order. That's shopblazemedia.com, promo code BLAZE10 for 10% off. Go do it today. For the past few weeks, conservatives have been debating whether to vote for Donald Trump after he softened his pro-life stances and even used phrases like reproductive rights and championing taxpayer-funded IVF. Rusty Reno, the editor of First Things, recently wrote about how the Republican Party has sided with the pro-life cause. So he joins us now. So Rusty, thanks so much. Before we dive into all of the pro-life issues, there's so much at stake.
Indeed. In
this election. So what are some of these potential consequences of this one?
We all feel that there's a kind of referendum about what kind of country we're going to have going forward, or even the future of Western civilization. Rapid demographic change, declines in fertility. We're undergoing some pretty dramatic cultural changes. And I think that I go into the election thinking that it's not just a decision about policy. It's really a kind of spiritual, cultural decision about what kind of country, what kind of civilization we're going to have. You could sort of put it globalist notion that an ever more open, fluid world, and a reconsolidation around our own traditions and our own way of life. I see that as the kind of big choice that we face as a country.
So the stakes are high indeed.
But it's a paradoxical moment, though. We feel the stakes are high, but at the same time, it's kind of amazing that there's also a kind of a certain complacency out there. I have a hard time figuring out which is more powerful, the sense of dread and anxiety, or the complacency and the feeling like, well, nothing's really going to change.
Yeah, and we should get into that. I think one of the things that does strike me among the people who aren't complacent is that I think more than any time in my lifetime, there may be less of them, or there may be more people who are complacent, right? The people who aren't seem to be talking about this as some kind of spiritual battle in a way that's simultaneously alarming and surprising.
Well, why would you think it's surprising? It does seem as though the typical New York Times reader just has a fundamentally different worldview than the typical Trump voter. They're almost as if we're living in separate realities. And that kind of clash is what I think creates this feeling that, the future of the country is at stake, which I think is correct. But on the other hand, Trump was elected in 2016, then we had this kind of chaotic election in 2020. So I think a lot of people are thinking, well, it doesn't really matter. Nothing's really going to change. The fix is in. And I think those are at war with each other. The feeling we've got to actually take measures. We got to take a stand versus the feeling of impotence and that the oligarchy is too strong for us, or the technocratic elites are too strong. They lock down the country. They can lock us down, lock down our descent from their governance of our country.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the complacence is acquiescence. I mean, it's like, it's over. I give up. And that does seem to be the case even in terms of the way audiences respond, right? Or readers.
Yes.
To publications such as yours. And so, I mean, before we leave this, I want to get your take. Do you think then that if there's more complacency, does that mean that the people who aren't complacent are more zealous than in the past?
I think if you look at the country, there are, I would say, 20% of the electorate is rabidly progressive, and they think that they're angry that we cannot realize an ever more inclusive, ever more diverse country. And another 20% of the electorate is very mobilized in an effort to try to reconsolidate the country, close the border, repatriate industry to the country, reestablish marriage and family as the normative center for life. So, but that leaves 60% of the population in the middle, and I think they don't really quite know which way to go. And that's why it's going to be, I think, a close election. I mean, the polling indicates that, and that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Because those two 20% are really at loggerheads with each other. So people talk about civil war. I think that's overblown, precisely because the middle 60% is not engaged in the same passionate way that the two sides are. But it is by the end of the decade, I think we will be going either one direction or the other as a country.
Let's dive into what you are very versed in, which is the topic of abortion. And
Yes.
the Republicans this time around, it would seem that we would be in the best position that we ever have been, because Donald Trump was out there and he can claim to be the president that overturned Roe. And yet we find ourselves here in this election cycle having a bigger debate about where the Republican Party should stand on this issue. And actually, for the first time, I believe in 40 years, it wasn't explicitly written into the Republican platform. So what is your take on what's happening right now with this election cycle in this topic?
Well, Dobbs exposed the sad fact that the majority of Americans, maybe 60% of Americans, maybe 65% of Americans, are okay with abortion. Now, they'll get very squeamish about late-term abortion, but they do not want to see abortion outlawed in the United States. So they may even believe that life begins at conception, but they still don't want to have abortion limited in a significant way. And that's a sad fact. And it's been very demoralizing to me as a proponent of the sanctity of life. But that doesn't mean we're unmanned. I do think that there are Florida, there's a referendum, Missouri, some other states. And I do think, we can get some wins in some red states that will, allow us to stabilize the anxiety and the fear that the politicians have. That this is, a lot of Republican politicians think, I just want to get away from this issue. It's just a loser. But I would point out that there's none of the governors who signed legislation restricting abortion after Dobbs, none of those governors have suffered political consequence. DeSantis was reelected by a strong margin. So I'm not convinced that the pro-life cause is a liability across the board for the Republican Party. We need some wins in these state referenda to stabilize the situation and figure out how to rebuild a consensus in America in favor of the culture of life.
Yeah, so go to drill in on that, because how should evangelicals and Catholics respond? I mean, how should the coalition respond in the wake of this? I see a lot of lame response and then sort of screaming and crying that we're not getting our way. And so what's the strategy moving forward, do you think?
Well, I think there are two things to keep in mind. One is we're going to vote in early November, and we have a choice. And we may not like Donald Trump's retreat from a strong pro-life stance, but the alternative is a radical pro-abortion Democratic Party. So I have no question, I have no qualms of conscience in voting for Donald Trump on the grounds that his administration is more likely to defend life than would a Democratic Party administration. The second thing is that we can work at the state level, at the local level, to continue to support pro-life politicians, bring them up through the system. And so there's work to be done, and can be done in this electoral cycle to stand behind Republican politicians who are willing to take a strong pro-life stance.
Yeah, this is just a way of commenting. It drives me nuts that Roe v. Wade is overturned, and you'd think, right, immediately it'd be, I always heard it's the equivalent to free state and slave state and all this my whole life. So you'd think there'd be an enormous rush of attention into these states to now that's where the real work is, and to do the real work, which would be developing those politicians, developing those pro-life policies, some of which are negative, some of which are positive, yes. Right? Develop a pro-family agenda in the red states where you can, and you would think you would see that. And on the voting aspect, I've never understood this with fellow Republicans, or I guess sometimes I'm a Republican. I vote that way mostly because I have to, but I've never understood the moral case for voting. It's hilarious to me. And the way I always like to say it at cocktail parties is, look, if I'm Christian in Syria, I vote for Assad so I don't get my head chopped off. This isn't a moral statement, right? I mean, there's two candidates, and if you can influence the better outcome, I'm going to do that. This is not complicated.
And it's not just on the life issue, but I think it has to do with religious freedom and the pressures put on Christians throughout the country under a Democratic administration. So I think you're right. The Assad analogy, it's extreme, but it's accurate to our situation. I mean, the prosecution of the fellow who got into the altercation in front of the abortion clinic in Philadelphia, that kind of prosecution would not happen under, no matter what Donald Trump says about his positions on the restriction of abortion, that kind of prosecution would not happen in a Trump administration and a Trump Justice Department. And that's significant.
How do you see it playing out this time around, Rusty?
You mean the
election this time?
You know, I work as hard as I can not to think about
Fair enough.
About the election. One of my, we had the Democratic convention. Oh, the euphoria for Kamala Harris, and my friends are all wringing their hands. And I said, just be patient. These electoral cycles. You go from one thing to the next. Events, the rise and fall. It's going to be a close election. I think that Trump will win, partly because I think there's continued underestimation of his support. There's still a kind of shyness of people because of how much shame is heaped upon those who support Trump. So I think it's not as strong as it was in 2016, but it's still there. So I'm hopeful that he will prevail in November. And I mean, part of my thinking on this, or my emotional state, is I do enjoy the thought of all those good people being so sad and crying.
See, you had an answer this whole time, and you were trying to hold out on us, Rusty. Thanks so much for joining us in studio today.
Thanks for having me.
When we come back, Chris Bedford will join us to give us his 2024 election forecast. Don't go anywhere. It's the most important election of our lifetime. We've heard it 1,000 times, but this time it might actually be true. Chris Bedford, senior editor for politics and Washington correspondent for Blaze Media, joins us now. And Chris, let's start with the big picture of how you think this outcome of this election could impact the future of the country. It's two very diverse countries if one wins versus the other.
It is. And, Republicans and Democrats talk every election about how this is the one that's the most important. This is the election of a lifetime. I'm kind of actually of the opinion that 2012 was the election that Republicans couldn't afford to lose, and a second Barack Obama term basically enshrined a left-wing kind of culture in our government that hadn't really previously existed. So you'd had Ronald Reagan, you'd had H.W. Bush, you'd had George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, who was kind of conservative, basically Trump's policies by today's standards, and all that started to change. But now you've got a Republican Party that went along with this for years. Basically, the post-Reagan Republican Party was kind of comatose. It helped sell out American industry. It helped people on Wall Street get rich. It betrayed a lot of folks who would have been in the working class. Launched a couple of ill-fated wars, and the Democrats kind of helped them along the way. 2016 was so interesting because it was the first time that someone had actually really tried to fight back outside of being controlled opposition. And that's why you saw every lever of the government, including the intelligence, including the Pentagon, going at Donald Trump, trying to undermine Donald Trump. And there was a real push to undo that, to try and get everything back to the continuing march toward progress, or the arc of history sort of stuff that we've seen over the last 4 years. So if Donald Trump wins this election, I think it's going to show that the American public and the Republican Party are willing to actually embrace for real this change in course. By the time he would leave office 4 years later, almost the majority of the American Republican congressmen, and even Democrats too, would have been people who've been elected since Donald Trump had been president, or in between his presidency or his second presidency. He'll have put a real stamp on the agenda, and they seem much better primed to actually carry out that kind of MAGA populist agenda. He's got people like J.D. Vance as opposed to Mike Pence, who is more traditional. He's got folks like Elon Musk who are thinking outside the box. You have the Tucker Carlsons out there. There's a much stronger network of support. And if Kamala Harris wins, I think you'll see a continuation of that rapid decline in the American Republic, mixed with a lot of civil war on the Republican side of, all right, guys, the populists have been given the mantle 3 times. They've won once, and you'll see some bloodletting.
Chris, say more about what you think happens to the country if Kamala wins, regardless of the Republican Civil War. I mean, what does that do? I mean, how does that play out?
I think it's a major thing would be a warning to those people who've just begun to fight. I was talking to our friend David Azarad the other day, a few years ago, actually, probably a year and a half ago, saying, well, things have just been going so poorly. What makes you think that this can be turned around if decades of conservative ink hadn't done anything? And he pointed out that people had just begun to fight. Donald Trump has pushed on a number of different policy proposals that the Republican Party still can't stand. They have to hold their nose to do it. They have to hold their nose right now to fight, to try and push through, and it looks like it's already collapsing, make it difficult for non-citizens to vote in American elections. They had to fight against their will to actually push back on anything on creating some kind of border security. The Trump administration proved that the federal government can actually have a sizable impact. They had to pull Republicans along on that. When corporations first came around and said, we're going to mandate vaccination on this experimental drug on the American populace and on children, Republicans said, well, Ronald Reagan wouldn't stop that, which is completely insane. When corporations are trying to say, well, we should have access to your children or they're going to kill themselves if we can't mutilate them sexually, Republicans have said, well, the Constitution has no place where I can stand against this sort of evil. That's kind of what this Trump sort of phenomenon represents. And if it's defeated there, if it's defeated at the ballot box, then all those Republicans who just want to go back to the old ways of spending more money on the military, outsourcing corporate wealth, helping the financiers get rich, while the American people can, and dissuading themselves that Americans can at least afford to buy this cheap plastic stuff from China. It's going to continue along their merry way, and there will be no chance, really, of altering the course that's necessary.
Chris, tonight we get the debate between Trump and Kamala Harris. And the last time that Kamala took the stage, she went up against Mike Pence. And the fly was the most talked about thing in the last debate that Kamala Harris was on stage for. So set the scene tonight. What are you looking forward to with this debate?
And since those debates, Kamala Harris has not had a lot of practice. She's had a couple of interviews, and she hasn't done well, even with extremely friendly audiences. She hasn't managed to distinguish herself. She's not had to actually debate her policies. She's been up there laughing and talking about coconut trees and making up stories that can seem to confuse her biography with Martin Luther King's. It's a funny thing. So this will be the first time that she has been actually challenged in 4 years, basically. And it's also the first time that she's been challenged. The American public is really tuning into this. I don't think many people changed their vote either way based on Kamala Harris versus Mike Pence that you saw in the last sequence. So this will be one of her first debuts. There's going to be an incredible amount of pressure on her. The same people in the media who for months have been saying Donald Trump is a crazy person who can't be trusted, he's completely insane, he's useless, are now saying he's an extremely formidable debate opponent, which is actually probably true. And they're trying to downplay some of the results of Kamala Harris, but she does actually have to do more than just stand up there and survive. She really has to distinguish herself as someone who didn't just copy and paste her policy ideas from Joe Biden's website, which it seems like she actually did. Someone who can stand on her own and be president despite having literally completely skipped the interview process.
And what does Donald Trump need to do, in your mind, then tonight on stage?
Donald Trump, I think, needs a repeat in some ways of his performance in the first debate. I mean, it's really one of the only debates in history I can think of where a modern presidential candidate knocked out the other one in a single blow. You don't usually get that. You get long rounds. You figure it out in November. But that's not going to happen. You're not going to see a meltdown on this level. Also, I think that you may want to look out for some more fact checking. You want to probably potentially a much more activist moderator. Trump's in extremely unfriendly territory here. He agreed to this because of Joe Biden. He's going to have to both restrain himself and not appear domineering and appear presidential in some ways, while at the same time driving home the points. And he can't get stuck in some kind of Russian disinformation garbage that the left wing keeps on trying to pull, the Democrats keep trying to pull. He can't be rambling in his answers. He has to stay on point. He has to be disciplined. He has to basically do what we saw in his debate with Joe Biden.
Well, Bedford, we are looking forward to seeing you on our debate coverage tonight and to see if all of this stuff will play out, just like you said it will. Thanks so much, Chris.
I can't wait.
Tonight, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris will take the stage for what we're referring to as the second presidential debate, though it is the first between Kamala and Donald Trump. But we have the best and brightest minds in political commentary coming together live to break down all the highlights of the event. It's everyone from Glenn Beck and Liz Wheeler and Stu Burgier to Allie Beth Stuckey and Sarah Gonzalez, Steve Deace, Dave Landau, and yours truly will be here to give you all of our unfiltered thoughts on the debate. So tune in to Blaze TV's uninterrupted, uncensored live stream following the program. So go ahead and go to blazetv.com/Blaze News tonight and subscribe today. And when you do, you'll get $40 off your subscription. And that's the biggest discount that we have ever given. So blazetv.com/Blaze News tonight for $40 off your subscription, and do it today. And Peterson, it's going to be a very big debate tonight. I know you have some other arrangements, but you are going to be watching it carefully. And what are you going to be looking for in tonight's debate?
Well, I think the question is whether Donald Trump can continue to pull the air out of the balloon and how fast for the Kamala bubble. That's what I really think is at stake tonight. And this is the chance he has to really do what he did to Biden, as Chris said. And there's a real chance of that because she is such a non-entity. So, it's very interesting. And look, two sides in this country, they're both looking at, watching a different movie at the same time. So there's no way around that. Certain amount of people are going to read it, a different way. They're always going to hate Donald Trump. But there is a real chance that her unlikability comes out, and we see the kind of route that will be necessary if we're going to be able to win.
And I wonder how many first-time voters like Jason Whitlock are going to be out there and tuning into the debate. And I thought it was interesting that Whitlock was saying it was January 6th and the possibility of World War III that are getting him up off the couch and getting him to vote for the first time ever.
Yeah, look, this was one of the things that Donald Trump did in the very beginning, was he pulled out first-time voters. I used to say to lib friends, I'd go to these civic engagement groups and we'd talk, I was the token Republican, and we'd talk about this. And of course, they wanted people to vote, and it would be great. And if I just described Donald Trump in the abstract, like an independent guy who was a Democrat and became a Republican, both parties, and he is getting new people out to vote who were impoverished, they would say, that sounds wonderful. And lo and behold, they got that candidate straight out of a movie, and it was Donald Trump. They didn't like it very much. I think that could happen again. But I think Trump also needs it to happen. It needs to be at that level. And you need a party. The Republican Party is very bad at organizing, always has been. And we're going to need to see the organization as well as that sort of passion getting people to the polls.
And we will have the full coverage, the full breakdown on Blaze News tonight on Wednesday. So be sure to tune back in here on Wednesday, because who knows what's going to happen tonight in the debate. But we'll be breaking it all down for you. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you then.